So if you look at the challenges that a country like India has, the per capita income in India is about $600 to $700 per annum. And we have close to 1.1 billion people, 1.2 billion people. So the thing is, the money that we have for e-government needs to be stretched across this huge population.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that open source is one of the most efficient ways of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And we do not really have the kind of money to spend on proprietary software as other countries, maybe the US, for example,
mm-hmm.
which has a per capita income somewhere between $30,000 to $40,000 per annum.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a huge disparity in income levels. It's a huge disparity in the ability to spend on software. And this is where the ability to reuse the software in open source, the ability to take the source code, share it with others, keep improving upon it,
mm-hmm.
is, I think, of tremendous benefit to India.
Yeah.
So we have a vast geographical spread. We have about more than 30 state governments across India. So if we use the open source model, it's a lot more efficient in terms of driving value for society and driving value for the country as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I believe that the usage of open source software should be mandated or at least highly encouraged by governments.
Okay.
Especially the Indian, in a context like the Indian governments, where
right.
you have a little bit of money, but you have to stretch it across a vast amount of population,
yeah.
and also across a vast geography and a vast number of state governments.
Mm-hmm. So I have a few concerns with open source mandates. The first is that who is going to make the decision of if open source is to be mandated? What will it be mandated for, right? Do we mandate open source for desktops? Do we mandate open source for handling certain kinds of records? I'm reluctant to hand over that kind of decision making to a bunch of bureaucrats, right? Mm-hmm. I'm much more comfortable, and this may be just my own American bias, I'm much more comfortable with allowing each individual administrator, each manager to make a decision on software just based on its merits.
Yeah.
And I'm comfortable enough and confident enough in open source software's ability to deliver value to each of these people that they will inevitably start using open source software once it's practical. The second worry I have is by mandating it, you're automatically creating a contention between the proprietary software vendors and the open source software vendors. So I'm not opposed to people making money, and I'm not opposed to there being proprietary software in the world. And I'm afraid that creating open source mandates might crowd out some otherwise valuable software. So say someone comes up with a clever new web server, right? So Apache is the most widely used web server in the world. It is open source. If someone comes up with a very clever new web server that happens to be proprietary, and it is the best option for a particular office or a particular agency or a particular project, I'm reluctant to say, well, I'm going to tie a hand behind your back and not allow you to use it. You must use this open source software. It may actually make users of the software, or those subject to the mandates, it will make them actually resentful of open source software. I would like people to come to open source software on their own power, right? Because I do believe that it will ultimately be better and a better option. I want them to understand open source software on its merits and not because their boss told them to use it.
I think the larger value is in driving that culture of collaboration and community and sharing of software.
Mm-hmm.
To me, so. Mm-hmm. I'm not so concerned with whether it's mandated but I'm more concerned about the fact that this culture of collaboration should be driven through the entire software system for e-governance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What I see is tremendous inefficiency in the system. For example, Red Hat has worked with, in India we have worked with more than 10 to 15 state governments in implementing various e-government projects. We have implemented treasury systems in most of these state governments.
Mm-hmm.
So what we find is that the application for each of these state governments is built from scratch.
Yeah.
Now that, when you're starting building software from scratch, the chances of success of that software is relatively less.
Yeah.
Whereas if these 10 different state governments shared the software, their probability of success would go up much more.
Right.
It's also me as a taxpayer when I look at this wastage that different people are building the same software again and again and again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's a tremendous inefficiency in the system. So I would like to see, if not a mandate, at least a strong a driving force which is top down or bottoms up, whichever way, which is driving more of pooling of software, more of sharing of knowledge, sharing of best practices. The advantage of open source communities is that, when something works, you can automatically, share that through the community that you have built up around the software. So you reduce the mortality rates and the failure rates of software projects. You increase the chances of success. And that is ultimately of great value to me as a taxpayer.